Amer Zahr is an Arab-American comedian and writer, as well as a law professor. He joins us now from Detroit. And Mr. Zahr, is it ever a good idea, regardless of your background or your religion or where you work, is it ever a good idea to protest your employee by walking off the job for 3 days?
Well, they went on strike. I mean, in America, actually, it's illegal for employees to be fired when they do go on strike. They were protesting. They were doing what any other American is allowed to do. They felt like they weren't being treated equitably by their employer, and they went on strike. So, of course, this is an American tradition, actually.
Except in this particular case, they were not in a formal union, so the laws about firing people who go on strike would not necessarily apply.
Well, actually, they are members of a union. These guys are members of a Teamsters union in Colorado. It's actually mandatory for them to be members of that union, and they all are members of the union, and actually the union has not been standing up for them in this episode, and that's even another egregious thing that's
But why do you think that is? I mean, isn't it possible that the union feels that they shouldn't have gone on strike just themselves, that maybe the union should have been consulted before these 200 workers decided on themselves that they were mad and therefore they were not going to show up to work for 3 days?
Well, you know, first, that doesn't really matter. Second, you know, when they decide to go on strike or anything like that. But, you know, this is all happening in the current climate of extreme Islamophobia that's going on. The union has been contacted even after all of this has gone down, and they have decided not to make any comment, not to come out in support of their workers. And so it begs the question that if these guys were not Muslim, if they were Christians asking for a religious accommodation or Jews asking for religious accommodation, would their employer have treated them the same way, and would their own union, who's supposed to represent their interests, have abandoned them like this?
But doesn't this suggest that the union doesn't consider this a religious issue, that the union simply sees this as a labor dispute, and in the union's mind and the company's mind, this has nothing to do with whether they were Jewish or Christian or Muslim, and everything to do with the fact that 200 people decided on their own to walk out of a production plant for 3 days?
Well, they didn't do it for no reason, David. They felt that they were being discriminated against because of their religion. And frankly, it wouldn't be up to the union to be the arbiter of whether or not this was a legitimate religious grievance. The workers are saying that that's how they feel. They walked out. And I think it's clear in the climate today. I mean, this is not the first time that we've seen an episode like this. In September, we had the episode of an African-American Muslim flight attendant who asked for a simple accommodation in her job, not to serve alcohol when customers asked for it, to simply have one of her colleagues do it. And one of her colleagues complained, and that flight attendant, that Muslim American flight attendant, lost her job, and now she has to go and file a grievance with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So this is all happening, and basically Muslims have been dehumanized in this country to such a point that it seems like our community should not have the same rights as everybody else. And that's what's going on in Colorado, and it's not the first time it happened.
Well, and I'm not arguing you on that point. I'm just suggesting that there are still 400 Muslims who work at this plant in Colorado. If the plant was somehow anti-Muslim, wouldn't they have taken some action to fire those 400 as well?
Well, first, not all Muslims think the same way. Second of all, maybe not everybody has the luxury, maybe, to, you know, these people are trying to put food on their table. I mean, they're already in a vulnerable position. They're not working very high-paying jobs. They're trying to put food on the table. So I wouldn't necessarily kind of condemn those who decide that even though they might feel that the company is doing something against their religion, that they wouldn't walk out. They have to put food on the table. I wouldn't condemn them for that morally at all.
And as we saw in Carol McKinley's piece, there are some people who are out of work who are now struggling to try to put food on the table. Isn't that something, though, that might have been better for them to think of as their priority, and taking their protest against cargo, which they may be rightfully entitled to say, no, wait a second, we want time to pray each day, we want to be able to pray in groups, as the company said they could not. They may have a valid case there, but again, isn't the solution to talk to the company about that, to try to resolve it before leaving where you work?
Well, from everything that we've heard so far, that was the case. And the supervisor told them, if you want to pray, go home. And that's blatant discrimination. So these guys decided to make a statement. And I think if they were white Christian Americans making this statement, that we would not be asking necessarily these sorts of questions. We would be saying these are workers making a stand, and that we stand with them. Instead, though, we think, and I'm not saying that you think this, but society sometimes, many times, looks at the rights of Muslim Americans as somehow less sacred than the rights of everybody else. And I think that's the environment that we're living in, and we're seeing it happen in Colorado.
Amer Zahr is an Arab-American comedian and writer. Amer, it's great to have you on the program, regardless of whether we disagree or agree or whatever the case may be. It's good to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
New York.